Hi everyone. It's such a joy to see people from all over the world popping up in the comments for this incredibly special event. Thank you for joining Lighthouse virtually for the launch of Women on Top of the World. Tonight, our chair for the event is the wonderful Ruth Elliot, who is an incredibly experienced workshop leader and educator who ran the Better Sex workshops in the Lighthouse Bookshop the year before last, and we were hoping to do some in April last year, and then COVID got in the way, but we will be rescheduling more. So if you are interested in conversations around sex, and most importantly, better sex, then Ruth is your gal, which is why we asked her to be the chair for tonight's event. So without further ado, technology being my friend, she is going to join us to introduce our speaker tonight.
Thanks so much, Mary, for having me at the wonderful Lighthouse. It's so lovely to be connected to the community, even if it's through a screen. And welcome, everybody. I feel really chuffed to be chairing this event because my first interaction with Lucy-Anne's work was when I was still a teenager, and I signed a petition for the No More Page 3 campaign that she founded, that I felt very zealous about, even when I was so wee. And so when Mari reached out to me, I felt like, oh, this is a celebrity, and it's very exciting. And so I'm really, really chuffed to be involved in this. The book that we're all here to talk about, Women on Top of the World, I think is a really important text and an anthology of experience. And as somebody who spends all their time teaching about sex education, trying to encourage people and empower people to have better intimacy, more authentic and kind, intimate space in their lives, this is exactly the kind of thing that I feel overjoyed is out there in the world. And so I'm really excited. Lucy-Anne previously published a sexual memoir of her own experiences, Don't Hold My Head Down, which everyone was raving about, and I can't wait to read. And then in this book has given a platform to 51 other women and non-binary people to talk about their experiences of sexuality and what they think about when they have sex. So without banging on myself, I want to pass over to Lucy-Anne to talk about what motivated her for this project, where it came from, and how she feels on today, the launch. Welcome.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lighthouse. Yes, I feel really emotional today, actually, I have to say. And this is such a collaborative project. So this wasn't my idea. It was brought to me by an amazing editor at Quercus called Katie Folane, who got in touch via my lovely agent, Jo, who's here. Hello. And I think Katie realised that because I'd written Don't Hold My Head Down, I was very comfortable with this subject matter, but it was her idea to interview, we weren't sure how many, but a lot of women on this subject. And crucially for it to be an illustrated book. And I think one of the things that is so stunning about this book is there's 51 stories, and each of these stories has gone then to an illustrator who's responded to the story and been inspired by it and created an original piece of art to go with it. So it's sort of a breathtaking book to have in your hands as well, as these moving, powerful stories. So Katie approached me with the idea, and it's just been such an honor to work on. I feel like I'm quite an ideasy person. I'm generally always know what I'm doing, and I've always got lots of ideas up my sleeve, and I just need more time to get them done. So for this idea to just come out of nowhere and be offered to me, it just felt like such a gift. And it's been just such a joy and an honor to work on. So I interviewed 51 women of all ages from all over the world, asking them this question, what do you think about when you have sex? And I know that many of the women are here tonight, and that's just so touching, really, for me. I've just been so touched by these women sharing this, this really intimate part of themselves with me. So thank you. And there's such a heart to this book. I think that's why I feel emotional today. There's a real heart to this book. So I generally, when I interviewed the women, I said, why did you want to talk to me? And pretty much all the women said, you know, we need to be having more open conversations about sex. And, you know, I went through this, and I wonder whether by sharing my story, it might make somebody else who is going through this feel less alone. So there's this really beautiful sense of womanhood and, compassionate womanhood, and trying to make it better for those coming after us. So, yeah, so I've loved it.
Yeah, I think that's a success story for sure, having read it in the last few weeks, and each tale is like a little kind of nugget to savor, because they're all so different in tone and perspective, and as you say, from all over the world and all different ages. And yeah, a sort of a special welcome to the people here who had the bravery to share, because it is something that we're not used to doing. It's not something that's encouraged to talk about such intimate parts of our lives. So Lucy, I think it's testament to you and your capacity as an interviewer to hold space for people to feel safe enough to do that. And that's something that I really wanted to ask you about tonight, was what was the interviewing process like? How did you find people? And then once people were found, how did you approach those interviews?
Yeah, so each woman came via a different route, really, actually, and often very surprising routes. You know, I had friends in certain parts of the world, and I just thought, oh, well, that's easy. They'll help me get people over here, for example. And actually what happened is they didn't. Say it was someone in Africa. They weren't able to help me find someone in Africa, but they were able to help me find someone across the world. And it was just odd how connections happened and how international it felt that, you know, our lives and communities are. So each woman came via very different avenues, and very quickly, I think I was worried at first that I'd find it hard to sort of reach different communities in different countries, and very quickly I got approached by women from all over the world. Very quickly spoke to someone from Iran, and areas that I might have thought, gosh, that would be very hard to to speak to people from. So yes, and I think that, but because I think there was a keenness to speak, a sense that this aspect of our lives is, we've been silent about for so long. So there was a sense of an excitement to speak about it, or if not to speak about it, to help me find people who might. So yeah, so I had a lot of sort of people really aiding me in this, in the searches for people.
And was it all like word of mouth through kind of the communities you're already a part of, or was there kind of a public service announcement like you're wanted?
Yeah, so I did a lot on social media. So I did social media, and then I did pretty much appealing to I pinpointed people who I knew had communities or were part of communities. So I did reach out a lot to people, for people to help me. And then I just really just kept talking about it to whoever I spoke to, really, so I just sort of kept that ball rolling. And then people were like, well, I don't know, but I know so-and-so who knows so-and-so who might have it. So it was a lot of that, really. So, and how did I conduct the interviews? So, I did really try to keep a really safe space for the people who spoke to me. It was really important that I showed up as well as I could, and I'd meditate before, and I tried to just create a container of love, and for me not to be in the way in any way. So to come really from a calm place of love, and also to have a lot of time for it. And I think the shortest interview I did was 1 hour, and the longest was 6 hours over 3 different conversations. So yes, just really creating a lot of space around that. Yeah.
Wow, that's 6 hours. I can't imagine how you then go about trying to distill even 1 hour into the short
story.
Yeah. What was for you, how did you kind of edit that down? Like, what were you particularly to represent? Because you have to cut out so much.
I know, it was awful.
Yeah,
but it was actually quite funny, because I'd do these interviews, and then I would transcribe them, and then from that edit them. And I really wanted, so all the words in the book are the women's words. I didn't add any words to them, but I did like I would move them around, but I didn't add any words. But and it took me ages to transcribe these interviews, but it was lovely, because I really went and revisited the interviews and connected with the women again. But then somebody afterwards, I was having this conversation literally when I finished all the interviews, and they said, "Oh, isn't there this brilliant function on Zoom where they send you a transcript of everything that was said afterwards?" I was like, "You come again?" Come again. So apparently there is, if I'd have got the next Zoom up for the ones I did on Zoom, I could have had a ready typed transcript. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when you mentioned that earlier. I was like, that is...
Yeah. It would have been a much quicker book.
Yeah. But when you were editing the transcripts, was there something, did you have a process? Is there something you particularly wanted to show, or like questions you wanted each story to answer? Because I can imagine it must have been a really heartbreaking process to have to like cut out what people said.
Yeah, it really was. And some people's journeys were so rich that there could have been 3 stories from the one interview. So it was a case of just really feeling into what felt, true for their journey and to share. And sometimes, and on certain occasions thinking about the whole book and what would be a really when certain pieces were being very powerful in that because they hadn't been maybe echoed elsewhere. But it was tricky, and I just felt into it really, I think, and they sort of came.
Well, it's a beautiful job. I feel like each one does feel very like how short they are. They kind of pack a punch in very few words. I found, and with the process with the illustrations, because for those whose books haven't arrived yet, I know some people in the chat are saying that, and you've got a lot to look forward to. But each story has an illustration by a different artist, and I wonder if you could speak a bit more about what process there was in finding the artists and selecting which ones would match up with which story. Because
I can't. This is all the wonderful editor Katie Folane who's not because she I mean really was really looking for artists and was I know spent a great deal of time really feeling into which artists to approach, and I think I feel loved that process, and it was so exciting when they came through and we saw these these wonderful pieces of art that had been in response to the stories. It was just it's been incredible.
I bet, because having that knowledge of and intimacy with the stories and having met the women who provided them, I can imagine, because even just reading them, you read the story and then you see an illustration and it feels like you're partaking in that sense of community and solidarity that you mentioned at the start, where you can see another person's interpretation and like what resonated for them and with them about the story, as well as just your own reaction to it. It's so lovely.
It's so lovely to see art.
One of the things that
just to see art exploring sexuality in this way, because the whole book is, they're not the illustrations aren't there to titillate. They're there to sort of they're there, expressing something deep about these stories around sexuality, and just that in itself, I've never seen anything like it, and all these different bodies represented. I think it's really something to behold, and I know my eyes have never seen anything like it. So
no, it's always really gorgeous when you can see images that depict sexuality that aren't trying to titillate anyone. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it makes a nice change when there's no attempt at titillation, and there's also diversity, where you can see people, this like impression of someone having like a super sexy time and obviously like feeling themselves, and then not, this very particular kind of look, which is, and also all the different styles, like having in one contained book like 50 different really diverse styles aesthetically it's really fun to treat. Something I was particularly struck by with how inclusive and diverse the book is in terms of queer inclusivity, and the fact that one of the stories early on, Cal, is a non-binary person, and they start their story with, I don't identify as a woman. And I was really surprised to see that in this anthology, obviously, which is all called Women on Top of the World, and felt like this is amazing that this person wanted their story in this anthology as someone who doesn't identify as a woman. So I really want to know how this came to be. What happened?
I love Cal's story, and I'm so thrilled it's in the book. They came to me and said, I like talking about sex. I was like, amazing. How would you be up for an interview? And they said yes. And it was one of my longer interviews. And it's so powerful. And they say, I don't identify as a woman, but I do identify with womanhood. And I just think it's so exquisite, because they were so articulate about their sexuality. I'm going to read a bit, actually, because I've got it out. Is that okay? Sex, and they say, sex holds a lot of significance for me, and I'm sure it does for other trans people too. We are sharing our bodies with someone else in such an intimate way. It's an emotional space. It's one of the only spaces where I feel like I am seen as I am. I could say so much about this. Again, this was a really hard one to whittle down, but I just felt it was just so important to hear Cal's voice in this. And they say, I like being big spoon, but at first I don't initiate. I think it's a thing for butch women or masculine of centre people. We hold a ridiculous amount of shame. And I don't want to act out toxic masculinity or treat women how I see a lot of men treat women. And then they go on to talk about all the conversations that they have prior to sex. And going on, Cal is having incredible sex. So, it's really sort of that. I love that aspect too, that, they've self-taught everything from these great queer women's blogs, and they're having great sex. But just how articulate they are about it. And this, I think what really touches me is this idea of, when they talk about shame, we hold a ridiculous amount of shame, and that really moves me. And actually, I interviewed Jennifer, who's an amazing trans woman, and I just loved Jennifer's story, and she talks about shame, and she says, and again, this so moved me. She said, there is a lot of hatred of trans people at the moment. I am very aware of how people see me. I have a lot of fear and a lot of shame. I think I've reacted to people's disgusted and aggressive reactions to something they see as freakish. And for me, these people, just expressing that shame is just, just really, I just feel that's a lot for them to be holding. And how do we add to that? How do people for her to say, and Jennifer's just just the most beautiful woman, I've reacted to people's disgusted and aggressive reactions, and just it's heartbreaking. But then again, Jennifer's having a wonderful intimate life, just the most beautiful sexual life. And she says, but I have an amazing community around me. I think I must be one of the luckiest trans women in the country. So I love these stories. I found them really moving, and they took me a lot of time to transcribe, because language is so very important, and I really wanted to, I felt it was very precious to have these stories in here.
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of inclusivity is so important, because whilst feminine sexuality is overall really kind of underrepresented or misrepresented in the stories that we read or watch, I think queer feminine sexuality is even more underrepresented or misrepresented, or kind of in a more acute degree. So I think it's really crucial, and I'm sure there's a lot of appreciation for the fact that those perspectives are included in this anthology.
Oh no, sorry, I keep cutting you off.
No, but
this
is your show.
It was an interesting one. It was an interesting one with Jennifer, because I knew, actually, because I'd spoken to Cal, and they'd said that this was a vulnerable aspect to be talking about. That I knew it was a big deal, and I really wanted the voice of a trans woman in the book, and I didn't. But I found nobody was forthcoming, and I did think maybe because I can't make people share about this intimate aspect of themselves. And then when Jennifer did approach me, she said, you know, this is generally something that, you know, we would only talk to with this sex is something we'd probably only talk to with other trans women. You know, it's so to have that conversation, we'd need to feel really, really safe. And I know a lot of people just wouldn't go there, but I think I could. And I like that fact that, you know, that there would be a trans voice in the book. So, but so I'm particularly grateful because I know that's not necessarily easy.
Yeah, I mean, that leads me very neatly onto something that I wanted to talk about, which is kind of how you experienced the interviews with your kind of particular identity. And so, like in this case, as a cis woman, feeling that like there was a barrier that had to be overcome by someone in order for that interview to be able to take place. This trans woman had to kind of go out of her comfort zone in disclosing to a cis woman. Did you find that there were any other ways in which how you present or who you are like informed that interviewing space?
I don't know, and I loved that you asked me this earlier, and I've been sort of pondering it all day. And I think, gosh, I wonder whether I would do things differently if I did do another one in this way. All I know is that I didn't really, like I said, I really just tried to keep this container as loving and keep me out of the way of it. So I didn't really speak much in the interviews, really. You know, I just felt like I was holding a space as gently as I could. So, I mean, I think, gosh, you know, like, you know, there's going to be ways that I just, you know, that I let my privilege, you know, get the better of me in a way, just because I think, you know, I think you can always improve in that way. But I'd like to think that, yes, that I was, you know, considerate. Yeah, really. But who knows?
I think,
sure, I could be better.
I mean, we can all always be better, but I think it's definitely testament to like a very significant degree of success that you had, that people were talking, that people were being open. I think that speaks for itself. But I think that's like impressive in and of itself. I was really struck by something you said about Cal before that I wanted to kind of follow on from, which I thought was really interesting. But I suppose before I kind of ask this question, we'll say as a kind of content warning, I was going to put a content warning at the beginning of this discussion, but then realized we're talking for an hour. And so to be more specific, I'm going to ask specifically around the testimonies that include reference to trauma, sexual trauma and abuse. So you're saying that Cal was talking about this quite common phenomenon within like masculine queer expression, sexual expression, of the fear of treating a feminine partner, I think the phrase was like the way men treat women, and that's quite a common anxiety. And I think the book shows and represents the scale and scope of sexual trauma that women are carrying with them into sexual intimacy, which you know, I sort of work in sexual violence prevention, so it's kind of so close to my heart, and I was so pleased to see that was represented, because I think often we are so squeamish around it that we want to look the other way. Was that something that you asked specifically about in interviews, or did that just kind of come up and out? What was the
came up and out? Yeah, it came up and out. I mean, it came up and out. And, you know, it was interesting because we had a Sunday Times review, and the reviewer seemed almost surprised that there was that much sexual trauma that people had suffered. And I was thinking, you know, the stats are high. You know, the stats are, the book represents the stats that we have. And but what we have here is these women aren't statistics. So, you know, these are stories of how these women have, you know, lived their lives and navigated their sex lives and relationships, you know, maybe in the shadow of this trauma, how they've, you know, but there's a, you know, and I keep thinking about White Tulip, who's the 22-year-old woman from Japan. And it took me ages to find anyone from Japan. And I had some wonderful Japanese women helping me, going, oh, it's not for us. This would be very taboo, and we couldn't do it, but we really want to help you find someone. And they did, and I spoke to this wonderful 22-year-old Japanese young woman called White Tulip, and she told me this amazing story of this wonderful sort of sex hookup she'd had, and she was just this remarkable young woman, and she knew what she liked, and she liked lots of foreplay and kissing and breast fondling, and she was explaining to me she had a friend with benefits friend, and he, was always sort of trying to speed things up, and she would be like, hey, slow down. And she said, when he got into porn star mode, she would be like, yo, dude, calm it down, And she was so, and I just was thinking, for me, it took me to my mid-30s before I was able to ask for what I wanted in bed. And I was just so wowed by this woman, this young woman, able to cultivate this sexual experience for herself. And I said to her at the end, thinking I actually had my piece really of this, just this sort of empowered young woman creating this beautiful sex story for herself, sex scenario, and I said, as I said a lot of times at the end, is there anything else that you thought you'd tell me in this interview before we stop? And she said yes. She said, this was a good time, but I have had negative times. And she told me that she'd actually been raped in her sleep, and she had to get an abortion because she fell pregnant, and she had a lot of guilt about that. She said, I would have had the child, but there was no way I could financially afford to have this child, and she carried a lot of guilt about this. She kept thinking it was her fault until after a lot of thinking, she was like, hang about, I'm the victim here, and I don't want I don't want to paraphrase her, please, so I'm gonna just use her words. So she said, back then I felt it was my fault. I kept thinking that if I hadn't gone to that club, if I hadn't gone there with this man, if I'd woken up and taken control of the situation, then I wouldn't have had to make that decision. But after a lot of thinking, I realized that it wasn't fair and that I had been the victim. And if I let it haunt me forever, then it would mean that my attacker had won. It was then I began to gain control of my sexuality again. And then she said to me, it sounds cheesy, but I want Japanese women to know that it's your life, your body, and you're allowed to make your own destiny. She was just so remarkable. And this, I think I mentioned it, this idea that women were talking to me to empower other women, was reiterated many times, and I found and still do very moving. Yes. So yes, there's a lot of trauma. And women talking about how they navigate that in relationships and in sexual situations. But the word I would use is triumphant. I think there's a triumphant spirit in this.
Definitely. Yeah, I was really struck by that so many of the stories that include traumatic experience or like experiences of abuse represent the capacity for people to heal and to overcome and to reclaim their sexuality and their capacity for experiencing sexual pleasure. And that's, again, a kind of taboo busting thing that this book includes, because so often the only representation we see of survivors of sexual violence, if they have any representation at all, is that they're so cowed and so traumatized and so unable to experience pleasure and so kind of blighted eternally by the experience that there's very little representation of the process of healing and the fact that it's incredibly common, it's universal to experience the trauma and then to be able to recover from it. So I was kind of cheering that was represented here, because it's such a horribly unrepresented reality. I think for me, this as somebody who kind of sex education and this, I'm seeing stories about sex that are real for people is a huge part of my kind of sense of feminist activism. And I know that you're coming from the stuff you're doing with Page 3 and the kind of testimonials that you were writing on your blog initially, and then with this book, and then the novels that you wrote. I'm wondering for you whether this book is that you see it as part of your feminism, or whether it's something else, and if it is part of your feminism, like, why is that what makes it a feminist text for you?
Yes, it's part of my feminism, because my feminism is part of me, and I sort of feel now that my kind of my mission. I feel like sexuality. You probably find it. Sexuality becomes like a passion and a mission, doesn't it? Do you feel that?
Yeah. I haven't spoken about much else for some time now.
Yeah, I know. I was like, when did it all become about sex? Like, what point was that? Yeah. So yeah, and I actually don't really use the word feminism that much, to be honest. I just I am just a feminist, just sort of just sort of goes without saying. It but it feels quite vocation-y. I mean, it feels quite I don't think I'll ever stop wanging on about this stuff, in a way. And I think because I think there's so much, I think sexuality for me, so exploring my own sexuality was hugely transformative and led me to feminism. And so I think, and then the more I kind of talk to people and the more work I do around sexuality, the more I just think, if you think about it, female sexuality has been suppressed for so long, and is still suppressed. And the fact that we know that, there are, estimated 200 million women and girls alive at the moment with female genital mutilation. We know that we're fucked up about female sexuality. We're terrified of it. We in the world. So there's such a long way to go. And, and I just felt, for me, being a woman in my 30s who was pretty, very privileged, very, successful in what I did, could get, stuff done. I was like performing in West End stages and writing books, but still when it came to men, I was a bit like, yeah, whatever you want. I was just like, I would get, I had so many hang-ups about my body. I hated my body, and in order to show it to anyone in a sexual situation, I generally got very, very drunk to give me confidence, because that works. And I could never ask for what I wanted, but I never even thought what I wanted, because I had grown up thinking I should be pretty and passive. And it felt like, and when I started to ask myself, what do I want, which was a radical question at 35, like radical, it led me on this great journey of sexual self-discovery. Yeah, so, and I've deviated now. I've kind of talked myself off into another time. So I think there's just such a long way to go. I think our script of sex, for most people, if you say, what is sex? You get this image of pounding heterosexual penetration, and that's sort of what we think of as sex. And actually, that's not a narrative that's been created by women. And in actual fact, interestingly, when you read the interviews of women on Top of the World, probably the least favorite part of sex for most women was penetration. As one woman said, I'm just thinking, when will it be over so I can have a cup of tea? Another woman was like 5-10 minutes max, and then I'm and I'm I'm thinking, just when will this be over? And actually, yet there's this weird myth that women want a man who can go for hours. So there's this, and and if you look at the sex, that the heterosexual sex that we get in porn is very much this sort of probably a very long blowjob followed by a pounding penetration. So actually it becomes very radical when and interestingly, the women in the book who start asking themselves, what do I want, are having quite good sex. And also when they ask themselves what they want, it looks very different to this narrative of sex that we've been given for so long. So one woman, Jaya, who grew up in Ecuador and Austria, asked herself what she wanted, and she was in a love relationship with a man, and she actually realized that she wanted to explore non-monogamy. She wanted to have other lovers, and that was something she's been doing. And this wonderful woman I spoke to in Germany, she asked herself at 50 what she wanted, and she wanted to explore BDSM. So she loved the intensity of being in a dominant, submissive relationship. So actually, and then for many of the women, what they want is actually, when I asked myself, it was slow sex. I really wanted to experience really slow sex. I felt that sex had been caught up with speedy routines, and for a lot of women, actually, rather than the pounding penetration, the women who are having great sex talk about there almost being hardly any movement. So, and what else? So yes, and interestingly, the women who are having the better sex are the women who aren't having sex with men. So it's I think because what we come to think of as sex has been created by men for men's pleasure. I think there's so much to be done there for women exploring and owning their pleasure and just seeing it unfold, and the delights that will give. So I think that's sort of, that's sort of pleasure feminism, pleasure activism that I feel quite passionate about.
Yeah, well, kudos. I think it's really important. I've definitely come from the like anti-sexual violence sector, where there is this emphasis on feminist activism being solely about violence prevention, which of course is crucial, but I think it's no less crucial to advocate for and champion and empower people to have pleasurable intimate lives, and that it's not, if the win is that people aren't being violated, like that's not good enough. Like people have to experience joy and pleasure and ecstasy and the kind of things that we see in some of the testimonies in the book. So I think that's fantastic. It was my next question was about like how you kind of define pleasure, given this fact that how we commonly do this like piving definition, penis and vagina ing being so wildly dissatisfying for almost all of the women in the book, whether that made you think of if there was a better way of defining it, or a better way of kind of labeling sexual intimacy that would be more feminist, or like would speak more to you and the people.
Interesting. It's not quite answering your question, but one thing I'm kind of, the word I'm using more at the moment, I've noticed, is the erotic. So like kind of feeling, and with that, it's not just, it's sort of everything. It's a sensuality. It's an aliveness. It's being open to the feelings. It's quite an embodied place, really, because I think, we're talking about sex, which is a very bodied thing, but actually we're so in the minds all the time, in most of the world, in particularly in the West, it's busy. You're in the to-do list. You're in the, the thought stream. You're not in your body. We don't sort of sense our bodies as much as maybe we could. So I like this idea of this, an erotic aliveness that sort of, I don't know. I'm not answering your question, but
that's okay.
I'm still working it out. That's why this is really not making much sense.
No, it's I think that's
an idea
like
of exploring
the
erotic, which is about living in a more sensual way, which is bringing in sexuality, but is also kind of like wholeheartedly, saying yes to other things that I feel it's sort of connected to nature, to natural, to being more embodied, to kind of something
like
quite
hedonistically
alive.
I think that's a great definition. I think that's a better definition than any other I've heard of like what sex is, like embracing the erotic or embracing
that's nice,
or an embodiment. That's great. I'm wrong with that. I'm mindful that the question box is blowing up, so I'm delving into it, and the first question I've got here from someone we're with, I don't know whether people want their names read out, so I won't in case they don't, is whether you will do one from a man's perspective. And that's something that I think is quite interesting from the kind of things that you're describing about, like kind of framing it as that our sexual culture is kind of serving men's pleasure, and that the feminine reclamation and joy in experiencing pleasure being so important. But the sex, and so much of the sex in this book that the women are talking about not enjoying, also sounds like it probably is terrible for the person on the other side of the pounding penis. And I wonder if you'd considered kind of delving into their heads as well.
I really want to do a men's book. Can we persuade Quercus, please? Can all the Quercus people, please? Yeah, I really, and it came to me a few times as I was writing it, just thinking, gosh, I'd really like to hear that side of the conversation. Have we lost Ruth? She's got very little on the thing.
I'm very little, but I'm still here. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I could.
This is such a power move from Mari.
Yeah,
Well,
so
it's
really
whatever. It's your book launch, as you were.
Can you get back big again? How do you get back big again?
I don't know. I don't think I'm in control of that.
But a men's book I'd really like to do, and I did think, I'd really like to hear that side of the story, particularly because, the book is about what women think about when they have sex, and quite often what women are thinking about when they have sex with men is wondering what he's thinking, particularly younger women. There's a lot of, and one thing I heard from a few people was wondering whether they're doing it right, wondering whether I'm doing it right, wonder whether he's enjoying it, wondering whether I'm taking too long, whether I smell funny, whether I taste funny, whether a kind of a worry about his pleasure or what he's thinking. And then there's also, the book sort of follows in age order, and there's quite something that happens when a woman becomes a mother and is in a pretty much a monogamous, the sort of a monogamous relationship with children, and what happens to sexuality there, and how loaded it becomes, and often how very sad it becomes, and loaded with, one woman articulated it really well. She said, I find it really hard to shelve mum and be lover. And that was reiterated time and time again. And that actually, what's wonderful about the book is you meet women in their 30s really struggling with this. And then you meet women in their 40s who've got through it. And they say, God, when the kids were young, this is what we had, this really tough time. And this is how we got through it. So it's quite lovely in the way that the women seem to be talking to you and to each other. But I think so it would be really, and I actually have I did just sort of try to see what it would be like to interview men, because I thought, would this be my book to do? Because it was one thing me talking to women. I felt, I'd explored my own sexuality and I could talk to women, and I wasn't sure whether I could do that for men. And I have had a few conversations with men, and I was just blown away by the vulnerability they shared and what they told me. And I felt they were really rich conversations that I'd had, and I'd love those to be shared. So if we can just persuade Quirkus, there could be a men's book. It should be very good.
I think that was a huge, that would be huge. I think that in these kind of circles in our, I'm back. I'm big again.
You don't have a picture on my screen. You have a little sort of, kind of looks like a computer bug.
Can anyone else see me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Technology wins once again against me. I don't know what's going on. Well, we can hear you. Okay, great. I look exactly the same as I did 4 minutes ago, so no surprises there. In our kind of circles that there's, I think we are, because the sex that we have as women is so often so disappointing, or is not the kind of sex that we want to have, or we're kind of conditioned into this really performative way of being sexual. And as you've written about before, that when our sexual power is diminished just to desirability, it's like you kind of feel empowered only when you feel desired, and you're completely disconnected from your own body and all of that kind of thing, is that we then the kind of fight against that within feminism with kind of books like this is so important. But I think often kind of leaves the masculine perspective behind and presumes that they're having a great time, because we women feel like we're doing everything for them, that it's like maybe it's not what they want all along. Maybe there's a kind of rich narrative. So I reckon push to make the men's book, or to have it published, because I bet that would be a really equally fascinating
and I think while there is, there have been this sort of what I call a reclamation of female sexuality. So we are seeing more books, like this, and Three Women, and there's more of a sort of these sort of conversations going on. It's still male sexuality is we're not getting the same for male sexuality. So we're getting
Yeah.
we're always getting a distorted version of male sexuality, which I would say porn is largely. I'm not talking about all porn here. So, but actually, real, just the really sharing the real vulnerability and where they're at with this, because it's sort of these gender stereotypes and sort of how we've shamed sexuality and feared it and put so much sort of religious control and all sorts upon it. It's shit for everybody. So yeah, I'd love it.
Yeah, that's definitely my kind of experience in delivering workshops about sex and trying to have bladder sex and pleasure. And
that's Katie. I hear you taking it back to the editorial meeting next week. Great.
Very exciting.
Is there anything to shut me up?
I'm conscious that somehow we're at the 15-minute mark, and I want to really encourage everyone who's listening who has a question to ask it, because I don't want to be like kind of hog it entirely and get to ask all the questions. So I'll ask from someone else who is curious as to whether you were surprised by any of the testimonies or any of the stories that you heard from the different women, or if any of the revelations within them subverted your expectations. Like, were you taken aback by anything?
I just think I'm quite unshockable. I don't think so I don't feel I was taken aback by anything. But there were things that struck me and moved me. So this isn't, I don't think I was taken aback. I mean, it maybe confirmed things that, like, it didn't matter where you were in the world. You hadn't had any sex education to speak of. And that was even Melody, who was from the UK, who was 19, who you would hope had some, relatively decent sex ed. And even she was, didn't feel she got any sex ed. And actually, she ended up doing a search for BDSM because she didn't know what it was, and ended up on a BDSM site that taught her all about consent and actually really practical things that she felt, were really useful in her development. I suppose Lucy, who was 74, really had no sex education, and she found out, her mum only told her about contraception when she was pregnant. But really, wherever you were in the world, there's still the sense that just this lack of not just sex education, but nobody talking about sex. So, within your family dynamic, for most people, it just wasn't a safe conversation to have. So yes, that sort of shocked me. And actually some of the African women had more, there would be elders and aunties who would come, when a woman started menstruation, when a young girl started menstruating, and talk about what it was like starting to prepare them for sex. So actually it's sex education, if you like, but it's not, it's not about female pleasure in any way. And obviously, for some women that was actually involved cutting or elongating labia with herbs. So, it's definitely not sex ed that we really want young women to be having. But that was sort of the closest that anyone really got to any sort of, open discussions around sexuality, and actually the women I spoke to from Tanzania had sexual teachings before her marriage, like 2 weeks of teachings, not just about sex, but about relationships, much of which was very useful, but again, not much about female pleasure. So that struck me that, gosh, we've got a real lack here of not just sex education, but even just conversations around sex. What else? But what I was really moved by, this is the first thing that came to my head when you asked that question, were there's some really brave women out there, and I call them the pattern breakers. And they were the women that most moved me, like to tears, really. And I cried with a few of the women because I think the lives of the pattern breakers aren't easy. And they might be women. So I'm going to talk about Jasmine, who's from Palestine, who had, in fact, I'm not gonna, do you mind if I read?
Of course not.
I get quite moved, so I'll probably end up crying. Actually, I've done really well at not crying. I thought I was going to cry today.
There's nothing wrong with crying.
No, I know, but I've been so emotional today for some reason about this. So yeah, I'll read quite a bit of Jasmine's if that's okay. She said, when I was growing up, even kisses were censored on the television. The first time I saw kissing on the lips, I asked my mother if she had ever done that with my dad. She said, no, that's not good. You might catch something. There was a lot of you might catch something and stranger danger, even with myself. Mum and the teachers at school recommended that you get changed as quickly as possible in case you found yourself naked. I was 15 or 16 when I was told by a friend that sex involved the penis going inside the vagina. I was grossed out and lost respect for my mother. She lets my dad put that disgusting willy inside her body. There was another wave of that when I learned about blowjobs. No self-respecting woman would do that. So I'm just going to... So maybe I'll just read a bit more.
I think that's really lovely.
What I'm trying to say is that she... when I was 6, I was briefly kidnapped. The man pulled down my knickers and touched my vulva. Then he got nervous and took me home. I wasn't very distressed by it, but I'd been gone for a couple of hours, and when I returned, I got all my mum's anger and panic. I think that's been the biggest trauma of my life, really. Did he touch you? She asked. No, I was too scared to tell her what he'd done. Don't ever talk about it again. I carried this for a very long time. Now I'm older, I understand my mum's panic. Virginity is a big deal, and that sort of thing damages a woman's prospects, even a young girl being kidnapped. So she goes on to say she fell in love and she got married. And she said, we had lots of sex that, in my opinion, was really shit. It worked for him. It didn't work for me. And she said, let's go to a sex therapist. But he's a Palestinian Muslim like me. He wouldn't do this. So she's had this life with this not great sex and all this shame and secrecy around sexuality. And she says she gets divorced and she has a daughter, and she is now she has a lover, and she has this sex that is so beautiful. How she describes it is so beautiful. But what really moved me is that she left this marriage, and she's really exploring her sexuality for herself, but most of all she's raising her daughter in a different way. And if you think how long, her mum had so much fear around sex, to say to your daughter who's been kidnapped, don't talk about it, stuffing this back and all this. So she said, I have a daughter and I pride myself on how sex and body positive we are in our house. She has had her sexual awakening in an environment that really encouraged it. Sad as it was the divorce that facilitated this. And she says, I am resilient and there is a fighter in me. I have broken a chain and it is magnificent. And I just think that life wouldn't have been easy, that marriage, leaving that man, carrying all that, as a girl around sexuality. And so it hasn't been easy, but she's broken that. She's a pattern breaker. And so it was women who've had those lives that very much touched me, I think. Yeah, I didn't really answer your question properly, but
no, I think that I remember reading that one, and that one staying with me. And I think, especially for the people here who haven't got their book yet, hearing you read is really powerful in and of itself. So I don't apologize for that at all. I'm aware of time and questions coming in, and one question here which I think is really very pertinent about how we've been talking a lot about women having sex with men, but that isn't the only it's not all straight women that we have in the book, and that could we talk more about the lesbian experiences that are depicted?
Yeah, absolutely. Shall I read a little bit?
Yeah.
I've just come to Maria Libra, who's from the Philippines, and she's 26. Where shall I? And she's, I enjoy having sex with women more than guys. They have more of an emotional connection and they know the places to touch to get the pleasure you want. I come from the Philippines where talking about sex is very taboo. She says, but now I'm living outside the Philippines in Thailand. I feel more confident discussing it. Yeah, so she's having a lovely, great. They're having great. The women I spoke to are having sort of quite wonderful sex. And I thought it was interesting that quite a lot of women had, they might be in relationships with men, but they referred to having had sexual relations with women at quite a young age. And actually, spoke to this wonderful woman from the Lebanon who said this. Sorry, I've got to find and I'm aware that time's going to run out. Does it just stop it after an hour?
No, I don't think so. I think Mari stops it, but we've got 5 minutes, so I think we'd all love another.
Okay,
and what a great way to end, to talk about good lesbian sex.
So this is Salma from the Lebanon, who's 24, and she's in a relationship with a man now, but she said, I'm bisexual. When I was young, I really enjoyed exploring my sexuality with girls. It first happened when I was about 8 or 9. A friend and I would kiss each other's nipples and touch each other's private parts. I had many girls in my life I was comfortable exploring that with. After a few years, I was caught by my mother. I felt shame, but also some part of me didn't feel it was wrong. However, after that, I didn't do it again until a few years ago. I was just reminded of another lovely part to. Oh no, I've forgotten. Yeah, so there's I think an openness to a kind of. It feels in the book like attraction to other women and sexual interactions with other women feels it feels like a very natural part of people's lives, actually, and I loved hearing that. I'm really annoyed with myself. There was another bit I was going to read and I forgot what it was. Sorry, I'm so sorry whoever asked that question.
I think that's something you can really see the trend of when so many of the women in the book are having sex with men. There's this performance pressure, and so many of the testimonies of lesbian relationships or encounters, there's not that sense that there needs to be the same kind of performance, which is quite interesting. Did you find the passage?
Well, no, this is another one, but this is Alessandra, who's from Italy, who's 28, and I love this one because she's so in love with her partner. My partner and I have been together for years. Maybe it's because I'm thinking about our future together, but lately I've been fantasizing about her being pregnant. And she just loves, I'm very much in love with her. I get moved just thinking about it. I get excited by the way that she talks and how kind she is. Kindness is the sexiest quality. And I just love this love for her oozes out. But what I really loved is how, and does she use the word, but the only time the word playful, I think, is used, is by women talking about having sex with other women. And it almost got to the point when I heard the word playful, I'd gasp, because it's like, here's this, sex should be playful, shouldn't it? And yet so often it's not. And yet actually when women were together, there was a sense of, I think she, quite often, oh yes, so I was talking about, how they might initiate, and she says, I might be watching her doing the dishes, working on her laptop or reading a book, and I want to go over and kiss her. I've always naturally been the initiator. I feel empowered by that. My thoughts are quite playful. I wonder if she will be up for it. I wonder if she will be mad if, knowing that the worst that can happen is she'll tell me to bugger off. There is implicit trust between us that I'm not trying to violate anything. Yeah, it's lovely. There's just, I just think it's
really lovely.
Yeah. She just so much love comes out of their relationship, which is so beautiful. But she says, oh no, anyway, sorry. I'm going to put it down now.
I mean, you just really don't have to apologize for, like, it's wonderful. Like, well, yeah, that was one of my favorite ones. I love that the worst that can happen, the idea that there would be, you can just bugger off, and there are so many stories where there's this sense that isn't an option to tell your partner to bugger off if you don't feel like having sex. There's this dutifulness and sense of obligation, and that one's so joyous where she's like, I'm just gonna chance my arm and she can tell me to bugger off and that's absolutely fine. And that's not a tense moment. Is really gorgeous. And I think we're at 9 o'clock now, and I think that's a lovely kind of note to end on. But Lucy, is there anything that you would like to kind of say?
I'm just looking at the questions. So just to answer Deb, Quercus is the publishers. So Quercus published Women on Top of the World. So so we've been talking about Quercus. So Deb's just asked what is Quercus? This would have been such a wonderful event to host in person. I know. What would it look like? Lots of hugging and crying and book reading. Oh, it would just be gorgeous, Eva. Hopefully it'll happen. And I was just drawn to, someone's mentioned the vagina monologues, and this is really awful, but I don't think I've ever read it or seen it as a play. I've heard bits of it, so I know, and I'm, but I've never actually seen, which is, I'm just going to hang my head in shame and rectify that now.
I think awful is an exaggeration. Like I think it's still okay.
But I was really drawn to Sue's question as well. She says, what do you hope will come out of sharing these stories? How could it change the lives of people? Can it be a catalyst for something more community-based, for example? Yeah, so I've got an idea of something. So maybe I should, and I do know Sue, so maybe I should send Sue an email. Maybe I should just, I haven't wanted to let this go. And actually, there's been something really beautiful for me. So I've been connecting with the women that kindly shared their stories over the last few weeks, just telling them about this event and the book being out, etc. And so many responded by saying, actually talking to you has really changed, my journey, and just having that conversation, had an impact, and now seeing it in a book has had an impact, and other people reading this, it will have an impact on other people reading the story. I mean, I was really struck by when I was talking to women, obviously people aren't having the sex education. They're not able to talk to people close to them about sex. So that quite often they go to the written word to find out about it. So books were quite key. So the fact that this book could be really informative and help people on their journeys is really lovely. But there's part of me that doesn't want to let it go. And I am looking into creating a website that would be this sort of format, but it would also have resources in every country. So I need it's huge, and I do come up with these huge things that take all my time and don't pay me. So what I'm really good at. No More Page 3 was quite an example. So my partner's probably going, don't do it, Lucy. But there's I sort of feel there could be that. I just think how lovely that's a resource that's there online for people to connect with and have stories again, and then artists responding to stories. There'd also be opportunity for film that covers sexuality, and then also like key resources. If you've been affected by the issues in there, then there's resources where you can go to get help or inspiration in that country. So it's a sort of watch this space, Sue. Have you considered a podcast? Yeah, but I can't get my act together to do it. People keep saying do a podcast, but yes, I probably should.
I think, I'm
going to stop talking now.
No, I'm just cheerleading the idea of like having this as a kind of platform. I'm thinking of how like the everyday sexism kind of exploded with Testimony, and when it was like anonymous and online, and whether that would be something that might happen with this, like what do you think about when you have sex, and it could just be this like incredible space for people to connect. But it's been so nice to talk to you, and to earlier when we chatted on the phone, and here to hear about how this book came to be and your perspective of putting it together. Thank you everyone for the questions and for the chat. It's so lovely to see the reaction to the chat all the time, and how well everything's landing.
Actually, somebody's just said, Jen has said, please show us a picture. Can we just end with the pictures, because that's such a good, there's me reading. Thank you, Jen. That's the best thing ever. So yes, let's show you some pictures. Yes, okay. So I told you White Tulip, who was the young woman from Japan. and she sees numbers and colours when she orgasms. I love that so much. So, sorry, I know there's not much time.
It's okay. We've been told we can take as long as we like.
There's Cal's picture. Okay. Oh, look, there's just so many. They're all amazing. Yeah, I'll just show. Oh my gosh. So there's Salma.
Yeah, they're so sexy. They're really,
I know.
really cool.
That's extraordinary. That's Jaya, who I mentioned. Yes, they're incredible, aren't they? Okay. Sorry, I'll stop. They're gorgeous. They're so
I feel like this is a bad copy. It's like, am I responsible for like closing the event? She'd be like, look. No, I mean, I'm sure that everyone here, if they don't already, will very soon have a copy. Because yeah, the they're just so gorgeous.
I'll just keep going.
I'll say for the people who have to go and don't want to miss out, that it's been recorded and the link will be shareable after this, and so you won't be missing out on anything. But I'll also say just thank you so much, Lucy, for being just kind of like a very easy and lovely person to chat to, and for putting together.
Thank you, Ruth. It's been really lovely.
Pleasure. And yeah, I'd say, along with, I'm sure, countless others, thank you for putting this anthology together, because it's a very, very kind of powerful tool for solidarity building and for not feeling alone and for feeling kind of embracing of sex positivity and sexual pleasure. So thank you for that. And Mari and the Lighthouse, thank you for hosting this event. I've been very chuffed to be involved in it, and I'm glad that people are enjoying it so much on the chat. If anyone has any like sort of further questions or comments, Lucy, you have Instagram.
I do.
So,
yep.
So I'm sure everyone can contact you on there. There's the Lighthouse for me. If anyone wants to contact me for some reason, I'm available on RuthEliot.com, which is in the event description as well. But for now, I think we need to say good night. I was told that when I kind of closed it, we would sort of quite brutally be cut off. So I don't want to do that prematurely, Lucy. If there's anyone or anything you want to say to people here.
Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you, Mari, for hosting. Thank you, Ruth, for being so amazing. But really, thank you, Katie, for this beautiful idea, and everyone at Quercus who's made it happen. And really just my big heart to all the women who shared their stories. Thank you. And all the artists who made the beautiful artwork to go along with them. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, everyone. I think this is us.